Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. Audiobooks.com is the cheap underwriter for Good Books Radio, which is produced by UTRGV Media Services for Rio Grande Valley Public Radio. And now here's your host, David Hinojosa.
Welcome to another edition of Good Books Radio. This is your host, David Hinojosa, and my guest today is a contributing writer for the New York Times and the host of the hit podcast Maeve in America Immigration IRL. She's a comedian who's performed all over the world, including in her native Ireland, Edinburgh, Melbourne, and Erbil. Now based in New York, she co-hosts Neil deGrasse Tyson's Star Talk, both on the podcast and the TV show National Geographic, and has also appeared on Comedy Central's Inside Amy Schumer and on WNYC's Two Dope Queens. She is here to talk about her new book, Maeve in America, Essays by a Girl from Somewhere Else. She's a very talented Maeve Higgins. Maeve, welcome to the program.
Thank you, and thank you so much for reading my resume. You know, it makes me feel like I've actually achieved something, even though all that stuff took me years. But when I hear it back in someone else's voice, I'm like, oh, you're doing okay.
You're doing great. There's so much to talk about. You had a very successful career as a writer and as a comedian in Ireland, right?
Yeah. I grew up in Ireland, and I stayed there, and that's where I started off doing comedy and writing bits and pieces. And then what I would say is Ireland is very small, and not to be self-deprecating, but it's quite you can make it there.
Okay.
you can make it there, even if all of your cousins buy your books. You get on the bestseller list.
So it's a family thing, right? Everybody can contribute, and you'll make it there.
Yeah, exactly. You can just be put the word out, I'm having a show, and you'll fill 100 seats, no problem.
That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah, I'm lucky. So yeah, I was when I was about 31, I decided to, try my luck in America. A few things happened. I got asked to come over to go to Kansas City. They have a big Irish festival every year. There's a lot of Irish Americans in Kansas City, which I found out isn't even in Kansas, but anyway. And then after that, they got me a visa for 1 year, so I thought, look, I really want to be a writer. I want to make a go of it. So I moved to New York, which I kind of always grew up seeing as sort of the, a really writing town, where I could find some opportunities there, or here, I should say. I'm on the line from New York right now.
Oh, great. And what were some of the challenges that you encountered when you first got here?
It's fun. Nothing like other immigrants face. I would say I'm very lucky when it comes to my immigration kind of status and the way I arrived, because I got this visa, and then I transferred to an O1 visa, which is an alien of extraordinary ability, which is one which I always say on first dates, not that it really helps, but I always say, I'm an alien of extraordinary ability. And so I think, I got here and I was kind of connected to my industry, and I had this support, and I think the challenges I faced were just smaller kind of cultural differences. New Yorkers are very direct, and Irish people were not. You'll never hear what we're really thinking. I've gotten better at it now, but I would say that I still get quite shocked when I meet a New Yorker, and within minutes they're kind of telling me, I had a difficult relationship with my father, and I don't even like my own kids. I'm just oh my God. Because we just kind of circle around the real stuff, and we talk about the weather, and we talk about the traffic, and unless we've had a few drinks, in which case you'll hear it all.
You open up a little bit more after a few drinks, then.
Oh my God! Not only that, I get really dark. I start telling you about land deals that my grandparents failed to close on and stuff.
Well, I noticed in your book, and on New York Times, you actually read an article about about small talk.
I did write. I write about kind of observations of living in this country where I'm not from, and one of those things was definitely small talk. And then I also wrote for the New York Times about someone who's been on my mind. Actually, I wrote the piece a couple of years ago, but I've been thinking about her. I'm from a place called Cove in Ireland, and it's a harbour town, and it's where a lot of people left from. So it's huge. In Ireland there was this famine 200 years ago, and over 1 million people left Ireland out of 6 million. So it's huge. And of course, many of us came here, and now the famine is obviously well over. I, in fact, have a bagel in my hand as we speak. But one of the people who left from my hometown was Annie Moore, and she was the first person to come through Ellis Island.
Yeah.
And she left from my hometown. She was 17. She crossed the Atlantic with her 2 little brothers, and I think about her a lot today because, she was an undocumented minor, and she was, taking care of her little brothers, and she was only 17, and she was welcomed with open arms by America. They literally had a celebration for her at Ellis Island. So, and she was reunited with her parents who had come over a few years earlier, like so many immigrants today, but they face such a different reality, so that really fascinates me. It makes me sad, but it makes me understand America a little bit more.
Of course, and I remember reading that from your book, and I thought that was so interesting, that this Annie, I believe, was the first to be in Ellis Island, and she migrated from the place you're from. So I thought that was a very interesting connection that you have with her, because you also came from Cove into America, so...
Yeah, and it's funny because growing up in Cove, I was always surrounded by this kind of emigration history, and it's this it's this kind of a tragic town because it's also the last place the Titanic stopped before I don't want to ruin the end of that movie, but I think so I grew up kind of knowing all about the people that left, and then it wasn't until I moved here myself I was like, oh, this is where they ended up, and how interesting. And again, seeing the contrast between they were welcomed here because they were white. At the time, if Annie had been Asian, she wouldn't have been allowed in. So that always interests me, So I started I did a podcast about emigration, and it kind of is a theme throughout my work now.
Yes, I noticed, and that was one of the parts of the book that I was really intrigued by because, where I'm at, we're right on the border between the U.S. and Mexico. We're right on the border, so immigration is always a topic for discussion in our area, and I thought it was a very interesting take that you have on immigration, and how you write about it in your book. One of the things that I noticed too was your trip to Friendship Park. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because it has a lot to do with immigration, and I didn't even know Friendship Park existed, to be quite honest. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. It's funny. Even my friends who grew up in San Diego, and they didn't know about Friendship Park. And I think I read about it first in a magazine article. And Friendship Park is a tiny little park on the border of, it's kind of on the beach between San Diego and on the Mexican border, obviously. Mm-hmm. And so you can visit there on Saturdays and Sundays. There's, I think, a 2-hour window where you can go, and lots of Mexican families come and see their loved ones on the other side. Mm-hmm. And it's so funny because it's really difficult to get to, and it wasn't always that way. Pat Nixon opened the park in the 70s, and there was a very thin barbed wire fence, and she was like, oh, let's cut the fence so we can go and say hi and join the Mexican people on the beach and the Americans on this beach. And it wasn't so politicized, and it wasn't so kind of toxic to even talk about. It was a very natural thing, and as you well know, in Texas, there's always been migration between the countries, and so it was amazing to me to see this park that's kind of under the radar a little bit, and it was honestly it's very moving to be there because there's a big fence and there's a double chain link fence, so you can't touch each other. You can just kind of speak through the fence there. So I chatted with some families. I didn't want to take up their time too much. I was curious to know how often they visited and if they ever got to see each other and touch each other or hug each other. I met a young man there, and he was speaking to his mother on the other side. And, again, in contrast to my experience, I'm further away from my family, but I can come and go very freely.
Yes.
As long as I have the money for the airfare.
Yeah.
So I kind of really felt that it was unfair, and that there was something had gone wrong.
Yes.
So yeah, it was a big wake up call for me, I think. And that was in 2016, and of course things have really ramped up since then. I think when I first moved to America, I didn't fully understand, the kind of the amount of money and the kind of militarization that's been put into the border already.
Yeah. Now, was that one of the most challenging things that you encountered? I mean, just seeing these families, was that one of the most, or what was the most challenging thing that you encountered when you went?
I think it was, well, for one thing, I unfortunately don't speak Spanish, so I think that was hard. So I had to speak through a translator, and I was worried that I wouldn't, just from a reporting point of view, I was worried that I would miss something or miss the nuances of people's stories. So that was, I can speak Irish, which is absolutely no good to me in America. I speak Irish and American, Irish and English, but yeah, I think it was just, there's this thing, feeling guilty, because I think I initially did feel guilty. I kind of thought, oh my God, like this, this one woman, she had worked in America for years, and she had unfortunately slipped up, and she had been deported. And I kind of thought, my God, like why isn't she allowed here, and why am I allowed here? And this guilt kind of crept in. But guilt is so pointless. Like, guilt doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help me. It doesn't help her.
Yeah.
And so I kind of thought, well, what can I do? And I think having a podcast or writing about immigration and having this platform where immigrants can just speak for themselves, that's useful. And I think it's much needed. I often hear people in the media, I guess, talking about immigrants, but I don't hear from immigrants, just in their own voices. So I think in my podcast, one example that I found so touching was a Syrian man. He's an asylum seeker. His name is Mohammed Zaza, but he goes by Zaza because, like, tons of his friends are called Mohammed. So when he was in school and the teacher would say Mohammed, everybody would think it was them. So he goes by Zaza. And Zaza is like a 39-year-old man. Himself and his wife have just had their first baby. And as you know, the ban is in place now, the travel ban 3.0, that bans Syrians. So Syrians are not allowed in this country. And think about how that would feel if you were Syrian and you were seen as the enemy, whereas in fact you're a victim of this, terrible civil war that's happening back in your country. Like, he would love to still live in Syria. He never asked to live here. But anyway, I thought that maybe he'd talk about that, I thought that maybe he would talk a lot about why he deserves to be here and what's wrong with the immigration system. No. Zaza, his focus is he really wants to quit smoking. He wants to quit smoking before the baby realizes that he smokes, but at the same time, when you quit smoking, you tend to put on weight, and he's already kind of chubby, and he's worried that he's going to get a dad bod. And, like, he reminded me of one of my uncles, Like, he's just a very sweet, like, funny, lovely man, and that's Zaza. He's not like a Syrian asylum seeker. That's part of him. But, a bigger part is that he's just a regular person. He's a dad. He's a husband. He's like working and trying to quit smoking.
Of course. I mean, there's so many similarities. I mean, there's nothing strange about anything. It's just they're seen in a different light because of the political situation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's crazy, isn't it, that I even would have to say that? you know. But I think it's worth pointing out sometimes, because I think when you hear, you know, I mean, our current president who's opened his campaign saying shocking, untrue things about Mexicans, and then you kind of think, oh my God, I have to now defend Mexican. What? Like, you know, it's crazy to have to kind of point out your humanity, but sometimes, unfortunately, it's necessary, and that's been the case for a lot of people in this country for many years.
Absolutely. Now, in your opinion, do you think, what suggestions do you have to change immigration in the U.S.? I mean, as someone that has lived here, well, not all your life, for a few years, what suggestions do you have? What are your thoughts on how to maybe start fixing immigration?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I mean, I do understand that I'm not from here, and that it's easy for me to kind of come up with, you know, my opinions and my solutions. But I think something that's fair to say is to listen to immigrants. I think often our voice and immigrants' voices are lost in the conversation. And I think that way a lot of myths would be exploded, and I think a lot of misunderstandings would be fixed. And so, you know, I did a story recently about immigrant nannies, and I think lots of native-born Americans have had nannies or babysitters or childcare workers who've come from somewhere else. And that was really eye-opening for me, because, you know, it's just the kind of shared humanity that we all have. So I think not seeing people as just, oh, what can they do for me? You know, oh, they do a service. And I think recently, you know, how the French team won the World Cup, and everybody said, see, immigrants are good because there was, you know, immigrants on the soccer team and they won the World Cup, so immigrants are good. Or I see a huge case being made for fruit pickers. You know, they say, oh, well, if the immigrants aren't here, then who's going to pick our fruit? And I think that's wrong.
Yeah.
I think it doesn't matter if you're good at soccer, or like me, if you can write for the New York Times, or if you do pick the fruit. Like, that doesn't matter. Like, your worth as a human being shouldn't be what you can provide to America. I think it's just your humanity is the important thing. So I think, you know, bringing it right back is to just value people and listen to them, and I think that would really help in the immigration debate.
That is very. I think that is so true. I think we need to start discussing more. That needs to be in conversation, and including, you know, the stories of immigrants and what their plight is and what they're going through. I think would put things in a completely different light.
Yeah, and I think too for people born in America to remember that America has had such a big effect on the world, and that's often one of the contributing factors to why people are moving here. So that could be, you know, as kind of sinister as America meddled in a country's politics and made the country, you know, dysfunctional. And so now they're coming here, like in Central America. Or it could just be that, like, I saw so many American movies growing up that I knew this was the coolest place to move to, and that's why I wanted to come here. So I think, you know, there's a responsibility that America has to a lot of people, too. And I think that often gets forgotten, that we kind of think, oh, in America, people think, oh, you know, we don't owe you anything, but, you know, we're all connected.
Of course. And I think that is so true. And I just still touching on the subject of immigration. I read one of your articles on the New York Times, and you wrote about Stephen Miller. How did you end up writing about Stephen Miller and him becoming the enemy of your dreams? Could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Well, you know, he's one of the only people surviving from the original Trump administration. He was one of Trump's early supporters. He used to work for Jeff Sessions, and I also have a huge problem with Jeff Sessions. I believe that he's racist, and I think that I kind of was keeping an eye on Stephen Miller. I was curious about him. He's young. He's younger than me, and you know, he's from this very liberal background, a Jewish family in Santa Monica, and I thought, why is he so why is he such a nativist? I couldn't understand it. I still don't fully understand it. But anyway, the reasons are unimportant. I don't care why he is this way. What I care about is that he's so powerful now. He's still in there. He's still in the White House, and he's working every day against immigrants, and he's working against undocumented people and legal immigrants. He wants to cut legal immigration by 50%. And so
really?
I think, yes, there's a huge piece about that today in the news. And, he's not hiding it. Like, this is what he wants, and I think America is closing down bit by bit, and I don't think that's good for America. And I think, so I started to kind of focus on him about 2 years ago. I was like, what's up with this guy? And I chose him as kind of my, person to keep an eye on. I compared it to, like, when you have a cat and then you get another cat and the cats hate each other, but they also kind of, like, always watch each other.
Yeah.
That's the way I feel about him. And so I keep, every day I'm looking at what he's doing.
I thought it was a very interesting article. Like I said, I read through it and I thought, I'm going to ask her about this because I thought it was a very interesting article. And but aside from the immigration, your book is really funny as well. You have a lot of funny bits, and I'd like to discuss those a little bit more in detail. Some of the things, and you mentioned in your book that being funny is highly praised in your family. Now, what is your family sense of humor like?
Well, I have this huge family. I'm one of 8 children, and I think being funny, it's sort of competitive in my house. So it's like a scary thing. It's like you sit down at the table and we all basically tease each other in a loving way, but also in kind of a cutting way. And I say that it's like, when there's a pecking order, which there inevitably is in a big family, you need to, like, peck.
Yeah.
And I definitely feel that way. I think my sisters are the funniest people I know. One of my sisters, Rosie, she's she does beauty therapy at home, so she does nails, waxing, eyebrows, all this stuff. And she lives in Cove, which is the little town where I'm from, and she knows everybody's business, and she can do impressions of everyone. She has all the goods on everyone, and she's just so funny in, like, a slightly mean way that I just love. And so I think that's how I grew up, and I still, like, my favorite people are always funny people. And I think I didn't always appreciate that it was, like, I always thought, like, serious writers were really cool, and, like, I thought there was kind of a, it was like sadness was important or something, or, melancholy was interesting. And that's all true, but I think it's kind of dishonest if you don't include some humor and some levity in your writing, because the human experience is, is kind of giggling at a funeral, or, like, when things get really dark, often you want to speak to that one person who is going to make you laugh. And that was, that's kind of a theory I've been testing over the years. And I write in the book about a trip I made to Iraq in 2016, where I was asked to do a comedy workshop, and I kind of thought, oh my God, like, yes, I'd love to go to Iraq, but who am I to go to Iraq? And this is still, ISIS was still in control in Mosul, and I was going to be like just 50 miles away from there. And I kind of thought, well, am I going to go over to Iraq and say to these people, like, oh, it's important that you're funny, and, like, don't forget to make jokes or whatever. But I went and I did this workshop, and there was 40 people in the workshop of all ages. There was Kurdish speakers, Arabic speakers, and, it was just like the comedy community here. There was sort of, like, clown kind of guys, like goofy guys, and then there was, like, serious, political guys, and there was girls doing these amazing, like, sarcastic cartoons that you'd see in the New Yorker type thing. Yeah. And then I was kicking myself. I was like, Maeve, of course, like, it's just like if I grew up in Iraq, this is what I'd be doing. I think using humor as a tool to kind of, for some relief, and as a way of expressing yourself, and as a way of connecting to other people too. Of course that's needed in Iraq, of course, yes, they've been through so much, that country has, and the people are so, they're so resilient and wonderful, but at the same time there's a lot of pain there.
Yeah.
But yeah, humor is a really important sort of a tool, and
it's almost cathartic too, right? I mean, it's cathartic to be able to express yourself in comedy.
Yeah, I think so. And I had been given a bit of a hint about that before, because I grew up in Ireland, and we obviously had the Troubles, as they were known as, in Northern Ireland, where Northern Ireland is known for having this dark sense of humour.
Uh-huh.
And I would sometimes go and play the comedy club in Belfast, and I remember it was before my time, but the booker there told me, he said, when there would be a bad atrocity, a bombing, or the soldiers had killed people that week, there would be lines down the block for the comedy club,
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be that necessarily the comic would address what just happened, but there was just, like you said, like this catharsis, this sense of community, of everybody laughing together. That's very important.
Absolutely. I noticed that, through the chapter. I thought that was extremely interesting. And now, how did how long have you been a comedian? How long have you been doing stand-up?
Probably 11 or 12 years at this point.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
You started young? I mean, you were probably, in your 20s?
Yeah, I think I was about 24 when I started. And, you start off kind of small. You do open spots in pubs around Dublin. That's the way I did it. And then you gradually build up to doing your own show. And I write probably more than I do stand-up, but I still do stand-up. I have a weekly show here in New York that I do once a week. It's really fun. Yeah.
What do you still like about it? I mean, you've been doing it for 10 years, like you said, or over 10 years. Is there something that you really, really enjoy about the process, or do you really enjoy about being a comedian? What's that one thing?
Oh, well, I mean, I just love getting laughs. Like, it's so pathetic. It has to go back to my family. Like, I just love making people laugh. And, when you can see them laughing too, or like if you have like someone in the audience who's kind of tough looking, like that they're not going to break, and then you get a laugh out of them, it's just the best feeling. I mean, it's like drugs or something. Well, actually, I don't do drugs, but it's like, peanut butter milkshakes or whatever. It just feels so good. And yeah, so that's the great thing about stand-up. It's also it's like instantly gratifying. Now, it's also instantly devastating if it doesn't work, but when it does work, it's a quick hit, and it's really
it's euphoric.
Oh, totally. And again, it's that collective experience where there's like loads of people laughing, and you're just like, I'm the queen of the world, just for those few seconds.
Now, not only are you a comedian, an accomplished comedian, an accomplished writer, but you also host a podcast with Neil deGrasse Tyson. How's it like to work with him?
Well, for a long time I've been his mentor, and he's learned everything from me. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, it's incredible. In the beginning, it's intimidating. If anyone doesn't know Neil deGrasse Tyson, I suppose he's America's foremost astrophysicist, and he's the head of the Hayden Planetarium, and he presented Cosmos on Fox, and as well as all of that, he's just he's very kind of wise and compassionate person. So I think people look to him for all sorts of things, as well as their kind of scientific take. And once we were doing a show, and he often does questions afterwards, and this couple stood up and they said, will you name our baby?
Oh, wow.
I know. And I was like, call her Maeve. They ignored me. And yeah, like it's cool. I've learned so much, as you would expect, from even spending any time with him. And it's been great for me to kind of the thing that he offers, I think, is this scope and this sort of overview, because I can definitely get hung up on the small things and the day-to-day news, whereas he's got this kind of big brain that can kind of look above and look around. It's great. I haven't seen him in a while because he's taping, and so we haven't made Star Talk in a while because he's making the new season of Cosmos. So that's great because that's going to be on Fox, I think.
Oh wow! Well, I mean, it's great that you're co-hosting with that and with him. And I wanted to learn, what's the one thing that you say? You know, I learned this from him. It was this one thing that you really enjoyed about learning from working with him.
Well, you know, something that he said before really stuck with me, and it helped me to think about immigration in a new way, which was when I told him that I was Irish and asked him what his heritage was, he said that where you draw the line is arbitrary. And what he meant by that was, obviously, I can say I'm Irish, and he can say that he's American, you know, or that his grandparents were from the Caribbean or whatever. But ultimately, you know, we all came from Africa.
Yes.
And that was his point. And it was kind of like, oh, yeah, like in the bigger scheme of things, we're just arbitrarily deciding things like nationality, things like borders. And that's helped me to think about it in a bigger way. And yeah, I think about that all the time. Now, that doesn't work when I'm coming through immigration to get into America. If they say to me, where are you from? And I say, listen, where I draw the line is arbitrary. But I think that both a sense of our past and an imagination is what's needed right now. And that's something that really helped me when he said that to me.
Well, that's very, very interesting. What do you hope readers take away from Maeve in America?
I definitely want people to laugh, and I definitely want people to understand there's no refunds. And no, honestly, David, like, you know, you do the book show. You know what I think. What I love about the books that I love and the writers that I love is when somebody is able to articulate something that I've been thinking or feeling, but I haven't been able to put into words. So if I gave anybody that feeling where they were reading my work and A, they laughed, and B, they were like, oh, yeah, that's what I've been trying to figure out, that would be my job done. I would be so thrilled.
Well, job done with me, because that's what I got from your book. It was a joy to read. Is there anything that you would like to add?
Maybe.
No, just thank you so much for having me. And I'm on Instagram, and I love chatting with people that read it. It's funny because, you know, you're probably one of the first people to read it because the book only came out today. Like, we're speaking on the launch day. So not many people have read it yet. So it's really fun for me to talk about it, and it's kind of weird too because I just like wrote it in my room.
Well, it was a great read. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very funny, especially one of the bits that I really enjoyed was one of the chapters I really enjoyed was the first chapter, where you talk about dolphins being some of the most malevolent creatures known to man.
Oh my God, I can't stand dolphins. They're the worst. These dolphins, they tried to drown me, and everyone thinks it's so funny, and I'm like, no, they're murderers. But everybody loves dolphins. Start a campaign against dolphins.
I thought that was so funny because, I mean, like you said, everybody loves dolphins, but you went against the grain. You said, nope, I disagree. This is where I draw my line. Well, Maeve, thank you so much for talking with me today. Really enjoyed reading your book and your articles. I'll definitely be keeping up to date with what you write. I really enjoyed it. You're very, very talented, and I wish you the best
with your book.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
I've been speaking with Maeve Higgins on her latest book, Maeve in America, Essays by a Girl from Somewhere Else. A delightful, funny, and insightful end-of-summer read. Don't miss it. I would also like to remind our listeners that if you didn't get to listen to regularly scheduled broadcasts, you can always catch us on YouTube. The channel is Good Books Radio, Strong and Cook. This is your host, David Hinojosa. Thank you for listening.